Good day, guys, and welcome back to episode of our Kart Class Podcast. Today we're going to be discussing why am I losing time on the exit of a corner. It's quite a common thing when it comes to drivers, especially newcomers, that, we're not too bad from braking to the apex, but as soon as we come out of the corner, we're losing a lot of ground on our competitors. And for most categories, the exit is going to be more important than the entry to a corner. Now, if we're thinking about a corner, from braking to apex, it's probably, say, in some instances, maybe 10 meters, but then the exit could be, upwards of 100 meters if it's a long straight that we're now finishing. So that's what we're finding, that the exits are most of the time way more important than the entry speed. Now, when it comes to why you might be losing time on the exit, there's going to be two factors. It could be the driver that's causing the loss of time, or it could be the setup of the go-kart that's, costing you speed as well. So let's look at some of the areas that the driver might be making mistakes on or could improve on to improve that exit speed. Now, the first thing that comes to mind is their racing lines. So typically, if a driver is losing out on the exit, their racing lines are that they are turning to the corner too early. And so what's happening with that is, if you're turning to the corner too early, your corner's shrinking. So instead of being 8 meters wide, it's starting to close down. So it's maybe only 5 meters wide. And as a result of that, now we're too late back onto the power. So if we're too late on the acceleration, then other drivers that we're competing against or we're trying to beat, if they're on the gas that 1 or 2 karts earlier, then, most likely they're going to have a lot more exit speed. And that could be a reason why we're losing time. Another area when it comes to the racing lines is not flowing out on the exit. So we've turned in from the good point, we've hit the apex and the good point. Now we're just not letting the kart flow towards the edge of the track on the exit. So we're holding a tighter line on the exit this time rather than a tighter line on entry. And what that's doing is now we're turning the steering wheel more than what we need to. And if you've ever sort of turned your steering wheel when you're going out the pit lane or just sitting in the go-kart and your mum or dad has just rolled you down the hill, when we're turning the steering wheel, it's like a brake. So again, if we're not flowing out of the corners, we're having to turn the steering wheel more to stay towards, the 3/4 track or even the mid-track. And that's what's costing you time coming out of the exit of a corner. So just make sure from a driving point of view that you are flowing out of the corners, nice and gentle on the steering wheel, and that should keep your acceleration and your RPM a little bit higher. The other thing is if there's just too much downtime. So there's literally just too much roll time from when you either braking or lifting to now reapplying the acceleration. Now they should be pretty short and sharp when it comes to our low performance classes. When it comes to our high performance classes, let's think TAG or X30, even a K100 engine, the response from the acceleration is a lot more instant. And obviously with more horsepower, it's not as critical. It's a lot more forgiving. But when it comes to our low performance classes, it needs to be a pretty short, sharp, brake, lift and roll. It needs to happen in pretty quick succession, not sort of brake, wait 3 or 4 seconds, and then get back on the acceleration. Because that downtime is obviously we're losing speed, which is okay. We have to get around the corner, so you need to slow the kart down to corner. But what's happening is the extra 1 or 2 seconds that we're lifting for, our RPM is dropping as well. So when we do reapply the gas, now we don't have that initial acceleration because it's out of the torque range as well for our engine. So just make sure there's not too much downtime between when you're lifting or braking to reapplying the gas. And when it comes to reapplying the gas, it doesn't have to be from 0 to 100%. It could be just starting to feed and squeeze the power on. And that's going to keep your RPM up, keep your kart in control rather than oversteering and actually losing speed. It's going to give you that enough amount of traction to basically not lose out in the exit. If we're now flipping it, so now our driver's doing their part, so they're hitting the corners right, good race lines, good apexes, flowing out, hitting the gas in the right spot. Now it comes down to the setup. Now this is where some of the parents can get stuck with the kids don't want their karts to be slippery, but also we need to have a gentle bit of slide so that the karts do release out of the corners. So one of the biggest things when it comes to why you might be losing time on the exit of a corner is that you just have too much all-round grip. Now, especially when it comes to practice days, we tend to drive on older rubber. So the kart does slip and slide around, and now we start making setup adjustments around the kart. But what we're doing is we're starting to tune a kart around the older tyres and a slippery day, when potentially when it comes to a race event, now we bolt on newer tyres and we go on the track with more karts, that there's more rubber on the track. So our setup that we found and we dialed in on a practice day is now too much grip. So from a driving point of view, the kart feels really nice to drive. But unfortunately, when the kart is really nice to drive, that tends to mean that it's got sufficient amount of grip, but that extra grip might be actually too much for the engine and the tyres to handle, and that's what's not releasing the kart out of the corners. So the easiest way, to try and release a little bit of grip is just to widen the rear track. I'd probably start there. You can look to go to a stiffer axle, but that's probably a bit more on the extreme end. Depending on, whether you might want to loosen the seat off a little bit, just loosen the seat brackets off. That might just let the chassis flex a little bit more and help it release out of the corners. But try and release a little bit of the rear grip to help your exit speed. From an engine point of view, because that's sort of related to the setup of the kart as well, it might just be that you have the wrong sprocket on, or a different sprocket on compared to the people that you're racing against. And what happens here is the larger the rear sprocket, the more acceleration you're going to get out of the slower corners. But it's going to give a bit of a compromise when it comes to straight line performance. But sometimes what you practice on is not what you race on. Because if you found that, let's say for argument's sake, a 75 sprocket is just the ideal sprocket for a fast lap time, when no one's on the track, you can drive your lines and so on. But now it comes to the race day and everyone that you're around has got like a 77 sprocket on. So it's very hard for you to maintain your cornering speed because you can't get checked up into a corner because you need that momentum. You need that flow, that constant flow for your sprocket to work. So now all of a sudden is because you're set in your ways of that's a sprocket that's always worked at this particular track, but no one else around you is racing on that sprocket, you can't use your good cornering skills, or now you're having to pass in certain spots where you didn't need to another day. So you still need to tune the kart up around the people that you're racing. And although we want fast lap times, ultimately the goal is just to beat the people that you're around. So let's just make sure we're on the right sprocket, or at least comparable to the karts that we're going to be racing against in our little pack. Don't sort of worry about a kart that's potentially 6/10 slower. If they're fast on the exit of a corner, but they're very vulnerable or slow in other areas, let's try and focus on what the fastest karts are doing, or the karts that are around our track position, so we can try and have a benefit to beating those guys on track. The last thing is it could be in the engine tune. Now, for carburetors that have a tunable carby, so that's K100, X30, rather than a fixed jet, which is the mini rocks, the vortexes, the Rotaxes, they're sort of obviously, you can't do anything. Once you're on the track, that's basically what you've got. Where from a tunable carburetor, it could be either way. It could be that you're too lean, and so what's happening is you're putting your foot down and there's a bit of a lean, flat spot where it won't go for that sort of half a second and then it kicks in. That's just it's running out of fuel. Or it could be that it's too rich. It will sort of feel a bit similar. I would say that when it's rich, it has that initial punch, but then it doesn't kind of accelerate anymore. So it's got a bit of a gut full of fuel, so it wants to go, but then doesn't burn fast enough. So then it doesn't keep going, just to try and explain what it might feel like from a driver's perspective. But it could be in the engine tune, is that it's either too rich or too lean. To be on the safe side, if you do have a tunable carburetor, try and tend to go towards the richer, so more fuel first, and see if that works. It's always safer to give it more fuel and then ease it back, rather than leaning it off first and having a bit of a flat spot and potentially seizing your engine because there's not enough fuel in it. So there's some of the reasons why you might be losing out on the exit of a corner. Let's get the driver right first, and then let's dial in the setup around that driving style. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast on why am I losing time on the exit. Hopefully it can help a few racers out there. And like I said, if you've got any topics that you would like raised and answered from him, I'm more than happy to help out where I possibly can. So until next time, guys, I appreciate you tuning into the Kart Class Podcast, and we'll keep in touch soon. Cheers.